Audio made possible by www.jackettomee.com. Audio Fanfiction Productions presents Wide Awake. Fanfiction written by Angscada003. Fanfiction inspired by The Twilight Saga written by Stephanie Meyer. Chapter 10. Wrathful Walnut Fudge.
Edward's point of view. I left Bella to go to English class with a heavy sigh. I'd broken all of my fucking rules. I can't exactly regret doing it. I watched the whole thing play out from my table. My brave girl with her chin up and her back straight, looking all grown up and staring down the monster, using poor, unsuspecting Emmett as her guinea pig. I was proud. Then I was hopeful. Then I was scared. Then I was pissed. Admittedly, though I'd take the fact to my grave, a tiny part of my brain was contemplating whether or not this version of Bella's was as bad as she made it out to be. I'd never witnessed it firsthand. And she had not only allowed me to touch her, but hold her against my body. It just seemed a little far-fetched that I was really that different from everyone else. But when I saw the whole thing happen, I felt like shit for even thinking something like that. Because obviously, it was exactly as bad as she made it out to be. That primary emotion of complete guilt is what compelled me to leave the lunchroom. Thankfully, Jez hadn't noticed the weird emotional breakdown unfolding behind him. So I gave him some bullshit story about how I had to go smoke a cigarette, and I ran after my girl. When I found her at the back of the school, all fucking curled up and shaking, it was the complete opposite of the Bella I saw in the lunchroom, ready to face the monster. She looked just like a lost little girl, crying, and gasping, and just needing someone to fucking be there. So I broke the rules. Because her monster won, and nothing I ever did could be worse than that. Still, more than ever I needed to stick to the rules. Because if anyone ever found out I had Bella sleeping in my bed every night, they'd get it all wrong. They'd assume all the wrong shit. She'd be the victim, and I'd be the asshole manipulator. And Brandon would definitely have me arrested for some sick and twisted shit like that. And I wouldn't blame her one bit. For the next week, Bella and I began to perfect a new routine. She came over earlier, at 10 instead of midnight, and she still brought me dinner, and I still loved every fucking bite of it. She listened to music on her spot on the sofa, and watched me eat. If we weren't really tired, she'd read one of my books, while I sketched on the bed, and we'd just fucking talk about all the bullshit that happened that day. When one of us decided we were too tired to make it any longer, the other would stop what they were doing to get ready for bed. It was a very dependent situation. Always tit for tat. My girl started feeling more comfortable being in my room. She told me that first night it was like her sanctuary, and as such, I happily granted her unrestricted access to my bathroom, which she used gratefully. She brought another, smaller bag with her, and would always spend at least 10 minutes in the bathroom getting cleaned up at night. When both of us were ready for bed, we would lay down fully clothed over the covers. Bella never removed her hoodie, and I never changed out of my school clothes. I figured we were both more comfortable with multiple layers between us. For the first few nights, there was still a distinct awkwardness that permeated the atmosphere as we climbed into bed. But it never lasted long. Once I turned the lamp off, it was like instinct or some shit. Turning towards each other, and without hesitation, bringing the other into our arms. The feeling of Bella running her tiny fingers through my hair always made me sigh. That shit felt so fucking good. Then after a few moments she'd start humming to me, and I'd hug her to me even tighter, which she always seemed to like. I think that's what Bella's trigger was for sleep. She liked being held, feeling safe. And for some fucked up reason, I made her feel that way. So I never hesitated in holding her closer. And I could never help myself from gulping in the scent of her silky hair. Flowers and cookies. It was like a lullaby itself. I'd always get to sleep first, but I never doubted that my girl was too far behind me somewhere during the night. Our legs would become tangled in each other. But we slept hard. I mean, really fucking hard. Even the worst of Forks thunderstorms couldn't faze us. We never had a dream, and I never remembered anything from the night of sleep after that song. In the mornings, the alarm clock would go off at exactly 5:30, even on the weekend. Bella hated that fucking clock. She'd always hug me tighter, willing the offensive screeching noise to go away, but I'd always pull away with a groan. Because I hated that fucking thing too, and I couldn't wait to make it stop. She had the perfunctory 10 minutes in the bathroom every morning, doing whatever the fuck it is girls do in the mornings. Brushing her teeth or hair, or plotting to save baby seals, or some shit. Fuck if I know. The bathroom would always be clear of any evidence of her when she came out, and she'd always pack her stuff up in her bag and sling it on her back. On the way out the door, she'd smile at me and drop off a bag of cookies on my night table. And I'd always smile back, because those fucking cookies made my day. Once she was safely down from the lattice sometimes, when it was still really dark, I would peek out the curtains to make sure I'd begin my own morning routine, with a shower, and shaving, and just generally being a fucking normal person for once. Jazz would still be waiting for me on his curb, but I'd usually make it to his house earlier than usual. Now that I slept, I felt safe speeding, which was something I found I got much enjoyment out of. School was the same as always. I'd still avoid everyone, including Bella. I'd still cross her in the quad, but I didn't let myself look at her, because if I did, I'd probably smile at her. And everyone would be asking why Edward Cullen was smiling at the new girl. Fuck that. She never seemed to mind. And she really shouldn't, considering I was closer to her than anyone else, including Jess. I could tell she was still tense at school. She'd make every effort necessary to distance herself from everyone. Always wearing her hood up and her head down, and never really talking to anyone except for Brandon. But she didn't have any more breakdowns, thankfully. I'd always spend lunch eating her delicious cookies. Jazz would always stare at the bag curiously, fucking dying to ask me where I got them, but knowing he couldn't. Then he'd go back to eating, and daydreaming of fucking Brandon probably. I didn't care. Every now and then I would allow myself a glance at my girl's table, where she was reading. She told me Emmett never mentioned the handshaking incident again. I was glad about that, because I really didn't want to have to beat his ass. I was fairly confident it wasn't a fight I'd come out of unscathed. He's a big motherfucker. And Carlisle would be pissed. Not to mention, it wasn't really his fault to begin with. We'd spend bio casually ignoring each other. In the rare event we had to work together on an assignment, we'd talk as little as possible under the circumstances. Newton always kept his eyes conveniently away from us. After school, I'd just drop Jazz off and go home. I'd wait in my room for Daddy C to get home, and then sometimes I'd drag my ass down the stairs and talk to him a little. He liked that shit. He'd always prattle on about some new state-of-the-art equipment, or some new book he'd read. But I always avoided contact with him. He still annoyed the shit out of me. Then at 10, my girl would come climbing up to my balcony, and we'd start the routine all over again. All in all, the routine was perfect. After having it for only a week, I couldn't imagine ever living without it. It only made me further determined to stick firmly to my rules. Bella seemed happier than I'd ever seen her. And that shit made me happy too. She was even looking healthier. The circles were completely gone from her eyes after 7 days, and I imagine mine were too. It was like being human for the first time. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew we were both becoming too dependent on the routine. That it couldn't last like this forever. So I resolved to just enjoy the shit out of it while I could.
Bella's point of view. 1 whole week. 7 nights of complete bliss with Edward. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced. I'd wait anxiously all day for 10 o'clock. I began coming over earlier. I told him it was because I wanted the extra sleep, but really I was just impatient to see him. To touch him. I found myself unconsciously making Alice as me, and I had Edward's favorite dishes, and then packing all the leftovers away in my bag. I'd always start a fresh batch of cookies at precisely 9 o'clock, and instead of 3 Ziploc bags, there were now 4. I'd have to physically battle with myself not to walk out the door any earlier than 10. And I never saw the clock on the microwave read 10:01. And if I thought I was a pro at climbing the lattice before, I could probably write an entire instruction manual now. Always start top 5th rung. Avoid